Hello, it's Debbie Evans here again, continuing where we left off yesterday, the Secret Adventures of Rolo, Phoenix and the Dragonling, and this is how early telecommunication by means of telegraph was used in Victorian times to catch a murderer. We arrived at Slough station and raced onto the platform just as the London-bound train was about to depart. The vicar caught a glimpse of the man through a train window, but was then stopped by the ticket collector and forced to embark on a lengthy explanation about what had happened. However, I managed to sneak under the railway man's obstructive stance unseen and jumped onto the departing steam train just as the whistle blew and the green flag was waved. An arm shot out and banged the heavy door shut behind me, almost trapping my tail. I regained my balance and rushed headlong through the carriages, tripping over ladies' and gentlemen's feet and luggage in pursuit of the suspect, and determined not to let him get away, as I feared a terrible deed had been done. Glancing up above the seats in the carriages, I couldn't help noticing that the netted hat rack was actually used for hats. No time for such observations now. I had to brave going outside through a heavy door, jumping over the coupling holding carriages together and back inside again as I raced the length of the moving train. The engine picked up speed on its way to London and I was flung from side to side. Entering a first-class carriage near the front of the train, I finally caught sight of the suspect and ducked under a seat diagonally opposite him, hiding behind some legs. The man appeared nervous and kept changing his position, crossing and uncrossing his legs, and I noticed that he was wearing a long brown frock coat which almost reached the floor, and he kept sweeping the tails of his coat over his crossed legs. Was this supposed to be a disguise? It made him stand out rather on this train full of people travelling up to the capital, as he was rather oddly dressed. The vicar had meanwhile given a description of the suspected felon on the train to the station master, and a message was sent via the newly installed telegraph system to alert the station master at Paddington Station where the train was heading. There was some confusion the other end, however, as the message read that the suspect was on the 7:42 train from Slough, dressed in the garb of a Quaker, Kwaker. This was because this pioneering telegraph system did not contain the full alphabet, and there was no letter Q. This was explained to me by Athelstan much later. Meanwhile, back on the train, I kept my beady eye on our man. When the train stopped at Paddington Station, he left the carriage and was followed by me and also a railway policeman called Sergeant William Williams, who had been alerted by the incoming telegraph message and was now in plain clothes in careful pursuit. The man got onto an omnibus, that is a horse-drawn box on wheels for the carrying of fare-paying passengers, a forerunner of our buses today. I nipped in behind him and quickly hid myself beneath a front seat. The undercover policeman sat in the conductor's seat, and the suspect mistook him for the conductor and paid him his fare. I was holding my breath at this point. Why didn't the railwayman arrest him there and then on the bus? I later found out he believed he had no jurisdiction away from his own railway station. We followed the man to a coffee house, and again I stayed with him. The next morning the policeman returned with an inspector from the Metropolitan Police, and they arrested John Tarwell, despite his protestation that he hadn't been on the train. Williams recounted his journey and told the amazed felon that he had even handed over sixpence to him for his bus fare. Time to head home. Hang on a minute, I'm in the centre of London. How am I going to get back to the time tunnel in Slough? Then I had a brainwave. The Chilvester Passage, a secret and magical means of getting quickly between St. Peter's Church in Marlborough and the corner of Trafalgar Square. I'll have to think about this for a minute. I was keeping my paws crossed that the dog called Chilvester had found the passage as far back as 1845 and that it would be open. I remembered the way to Trafalgar Square and eventually found the sign of the Talbot Cafe right by the railings. I was in luck. The Chilvester passage was there, and I opened the hinged door with my front paw and squeezed my way inside. It was pitch dark. Feeling around with my nose, I couldn't find any sign of a discarded torch or lantern, but I recalled that the passage followed a pretty straight line from London to Marlborough, so I moved quickly and silently westwards along the dark tunnel and soon found myself emerging in the nave of St. Peter's Church. Luckily for me, there was still a plank excluding the draught from the gap along the bottom of the west door, which I easily shifted out of the way. Within a couple of minutes, I'd emerged into the silent and dark High Street, completely unseen. I scampered up the hill, home to my basket, before I was missed, exhausted from the adventure. Snuggled in my bed, dreaming of catching criminals, I woke before dawn to a furious tapping at the window. Yulia's face was illuminated, and I struggled to shake off my sleep and push the trapdoor inside the cupboard. "There you are. We were worried about you. Dar and I were waiting in the time tunnel." The woodland girl bopped me on the nose. "Sorry, Yulia. I used the Chilvester passage. It was easier than going back to Slough. I'm sorry. I should have thought," I apologised. "Athelstan said you might do that, but we couldn't be sure. We were worried you might be stuck in Victorian London. Athelstan wants to see you." Yulia climbed on Bubo's back, held her lantern aloft, and I followed the girl and the owl to the Athelstan tree. No harm done, but I was sorry to have given my friend the worry and wasted time. Athelstan saw at once that I was sorry for the distress I'd caused, and instead of the expected telling off, he told me instead the outcome of the story. During the subsequent trial for the murder of Sarah Hart, who had died from prussic acid poisoning, John Tarwell's defence said that she'd probably swallowed too many apple pips during the festive period, which had given her a fatal dose of poison. Although this was nonsense and laughed out of court, it was recorded that there was a sharp drop in the sale of apples at this time. This goes to show how public opinion can be swayed by a statement issued with a tone of authority, however silly it might seem. Tarwell was sentenced to death by hanging and made a full confession before his execution on the 28th of March 1848. A positive outcome from this tragic tale was the excellent publicity given to the role of the Telegraph in apprehending a murderer, which encouraged further development of the invention. This little pup was the birth of telecommunication, and the problem of the few missing letters was resolved by the advent of Morse code. But that's probably enough history for one night. We can continue our discussions on telecommunication another time, as it is a fascinating subject. I nodded, interested but exhausted from interrupted sleep, as well as exciting adventure. My head was filled with questions, but for now I had to make my way home before I was missed. The next morning, the smiley lady was very concerned that I just didn't want to get out of my basket, despite all her bribing and coaxing. I was worried she might take me to the vet if I didn't perk up. So I pushed through the tiredness and tried to behave as normal. So that's the end of that chapter, and I will return tomorrow with another reading from a different book in the Secret Adventures of Rolo series. Thank you for listening. Bye.